Welcome to the Growth Bridge. I am your host, Ivo-Castillo, here in Miami, and this podcast is for entrepreneurs, leaders with strong ties in Latin America who want to understand how Anglo founders think about growth, leadership, marketing, and decision making, and how to apply their mindset in your own business. Today, I'm excited to have Michael Liebman. He's the founder of IPQ Analytics. Hello, Michael. How are you?
Very good, Ivo. Nice to meet you again.
Thank you. Michael, first question. Can you share a bit about your background and what is IPQ Analytics?
Sure. So I have a mixed background. My formal training is in theoretical chemistry, and I started out in academics. I went into big industry, and from there, never really as a chemist, but interested in medicine and healthcare and life sciences. And from big industry, we moved on to some startups, and I actually went back to academics at the University of Pennsylvania Cancer Center, and then was recruited to run a breast cancer center for the Department of Defense jointly with Walter Reed. And from there, we moved on to start initially strategic medicine and now IPQ Analytics. And what we're doing with IPQ Analytics is trying to address gaps that I saw both when I was in industry, including pharma, and when I was in academics, and tried to provide bridges across those gaps to help improve decision-making in healthcare, drug development, and policy making.
And what led you to that space?
Well, what led me to that space was observing what was going on. And I tend to have what I call a systems view, a systems perspective. So I'm focused on problem solving, not on technology. And so when I'm approaching a problem from a systems view, I tend to look at how big is the problem, not how small is the problem. And in doing that, you start to see things that could be important but haven't been considered because maybe the technology isn't well suited to address them. And so I find that there could be very critical for solving the problem, even though you may not have the tools or the data. And so that led me, when I was in industry, to become frustrated a bit in pharma because I found that there was emphasis on developing drugs and not quite as much emphasis on understanding the disease. When I went back to academics, I thought that would be reversed again when I went back into the medical school cancer center. And I found that there was a lot of interest in what we were calling at the time the genetic revolution, and a lot of people wanted to start new companies. And I saw it moving actually more in the commercial side than in the pure academic side. And so that's why I really left to go out on my own to try to address the problems that I felt committed to, that I wanted to make transparent to other people.
That's great. In this case, what do the people misunderstand about this?
There's a strong tendency, it's human nature, to try to do what we call a reductionist view of things. You like to have a simple problem, not see a complex problem. You'd like not to have all of the fuzziness, so to speak, around what you're doing. And nowadays, with technology evolving very rapidly, people become well trained in the technology. And it's the old story of if you have a hammer, you want everything to be a nail, but not everything is a nail. And as a result, you may not have the right tool for the problem that needs to be solved, but your focus is on applying the tool and addressing the part of the problem that your tool could work on. And that's the part that I find not completely satisfying. And that's the part we're trying to have an impact on, moving away from that view.
And in all this space that you are seeing, trying to, I think, with data, with insights, trying to get to that bigger problem,
Mhm.
I guess, to get into the roots of the problem, in
The root
knowing,
cause of the problem.
in knowing the exterior kind of thing that you just only see, not through the eyes. It's just
Right,
beyond that.
right.
What is the pattern have you seen that really surprised you?
Well, I don't know that it surprised me. I've seen it's human nature and the resistance to change at a cultural level. And the fact that I would have to say it's also partially a limitation of our educational system. We don't train people to think critically. We train people to perform. Thinking critically means you have to be willing to come up with ideas that fail. and then learn from your mistakes. If you only can learn from success, you'll never learn how to succeed because you don't know necessarily why something worked. But when something doesn't work and you spend the time to figure that out, you've now gained new knowledge and new expertise to try to avoid that in the future. And what has been a little bit of a surprise is learning how pervasive the resistance is. And in part because of cultural reasons and the way the educational system has evolved over these last years and the rapid advance of technology, that people don't focus on that kind of approach. That really needs to start as early as primary school, not wait till you're in college or graduate school to develop those skills.
And this is out of topic, but how do you do that? Because what you're saying maybe is I completely agree, especially when you see in the young kids, right? If example, my son, 10 years old, all the time I have to tell him to think critically, to reach for both sides of the story, to search more. No, don't get one opinion. Don't get with one part of the story with 15 seconds video, right?
Yeah.
And I bet most of the audience has children, has a family, and even themselves immersed in this technology and
Right.
communications madness that we live in,
Yeah.
that we forgot sometimes to be critics.
Well, and it's funny because almost everybody at some point will make the comment as a parent that you have to learn from your mistakes. But that means you have to allow someone to make mistakes and then help them learn from the mistake. If you don't allow them to fail, then they don't know what the difference is between success and failure. If you only give them that one element, they don't know how to differentiate that. And it's a challenge and they avoid it.
And that is part of our new society as parents.
Yes.
Our parents let us fail.
Yes.
And the
Yes.
parents from today, they don't want you to.
They don't want that. That's one of the challenges now. That I was exactly what I was saying.
Yes, that's completely right. I haven't seen that way. Let's continue to
And it's
patterns.
even in business, if you're starting a new business,
Yeah,
okay, it's okay to start something and fail. It doesn't have to be a success from the beginning, but you have to be able to learn from that failure, why it failed, what did you miss, what went wrong, so that you can avoid it the next time. And so entrepreneurs need to have that as well,
correct.
because every idea is not a great idea.
Correct. Most of the time, the most of ideas, they are not great ideas. Why do people have information but still struggle to act on it?
There's a difference. People react emotionally, not logically. And so when you reach in for something, you reach in and pull out what's comfortable, which frequently is what you've done in the past, or you think you've seen someone else do. And you're not necessarily trying to logically process it to see if there may have been limitations or challenges that weren't discussed that could impact what you try to do. And then the second part of that is there's a great tendency to want confirmation from others as to what you're doing and how you're doing it, rather than necessarily taking the chance to do what you think is right and the way it should be done when it isn't exactly what everyone else is doing.
And putting the bigger picture in what you're trying to accomplish with
Yeah.
IPQ. How how do you translate that to that? So can you give me an example or something
Yeah.
happened when?
So we do a lot of work with pharma and healthcare systems. We also work with payers and government agencies, and we work internationally. So we're working in Australia, Italy, China, Mexico, Chile, and Ghana. Okay. And one of the things that we have to deal with along the lines of what you're asking is how do you come up with an approach? Do you come up with an approach to satisfy exactly what your client may want, or are you trying to help your client see what the real root cause problem is? And a lot of people take the first route that's financially successful. We take the second route. So if someone comes and asks us to come in and help them solve a problem, I'm always willing to do that. Usually what they want me to do is describe what we're doing and then we'll discuss their problems. And I go, that's not how we do it though. First, we sit down and discuss your problem and then figure out what your real problem is, maybe not what you think it is. And then if I have something that's useful, I'll show it to you. And if I don't, I'll tell you. But otherwise, you're trying to match things where you have no idea if there is a connection. And I don't have the confidence that you know what your problem actually is. And most frequently find out the problem's a bit different from what they ask you. If I work with physicians, the typical question they're going to ask about is related to what's going to happen when the next patient comes through their door into the office and what do they need. But that may not be the real root problem that they need to address. They may ask you, how do I affect this diagnosis more rapidly? When the real question is, how do I know if I'm even diagnosing it correctly? And that is a deeper question, but one that you're not going to resolve in a 15-minute office visit. And that's where we try to position ourselves to help with those deeper questions, to make those shorter questions more effective.
Correct. And where did you see the biggest gap between when you come with an insight and the real action?
Well, again, it tends to be a cultural thing. It tends to be everyone would like to see absolute proof that that what they think is right is not necessarily right. And it's the general resistance culturally, the tendency to have more of an emotional response and attachment that tends to put up barriers to try to present something logically and have it be accepted purely on a logic basis. When I try to lay something out on a logic basis, if it takes 10 steps, I'm perfectly willing to have you discuss each of those 10 steps to tell me where you think it might be different than what we're seeing. And then maybe we'll change everything. But if all you're talking about is the beginning and the end, then we don't even know how we got there. And it was the right ends. And so that's some of the resistance because everyone wants something quick and fast and cheap to a certain extent. And that's not what, it's like I was in pharma. If all the drugs worked, I would sit on the sidelines and applaud, not caring how they got. But they don't work. And we have many diseases where we have very poor, if any, treatments. So rather than just keep pushing that same approach, what we want to do is step back and say, maybe we need to modify the way we're doing it, not just keep doing it more frequently and in bigger quantities till we find something that works. And that change is not just what's the newest technology that we have, it's really what is the problem we're trying to solve.
And for curious, how hard is to explain that or try to?
Very hard.
Because what you're saying is a common problem in every
Every,
place.
yeah.
Yeah, so
That's why I said it's cultural. It's human
human
nature.
life. Yeah,
Yeah.
human nature and amplified with the modern and technology we live in. We want
Right.
everything quick.
I'll give you a simple example. Everybody wants to use, say, for drug discovery or in medicine, what they call big data. They want
Yes.
as much data as possible,
Yeah,
and then they want to use AI to address the data.
Yeah,
Okay.
correct.
My question is, well, there's two parts to this. One part is what you have with the AI, which is really a statistical method, is the ability to see patterns in the data that you may not have seen before. I absolutely agree that that happens. But what people forget, if you think bigger, the bigger picture, the data that you have was collected because someone had a model that said, this is the data you need for that model. Okay. And therefore, what you're analyzing is the data of that model, and you're analyzing that model, but you don't know that you may be missing critical data that model never thought of.
Okay. Yes, correct.
You're not going to find it that way because that's not designed to solve that problem. So rather than do that, we start by building new models and then analyze the new models, regardless of whether the data exists or not. So instead of doing data-driven modeling, we do model-driven data. So we look for the data when we have a model. And if the data doesn't exist We may collect it. We're collecting data internationally. And if we can't find the data at all, then we try to evaluate what's the impact on the model of not having that data. But that's changing the way we look at the problem. And almost everyone is trying to do it in terms of, we have the technology of AI. We should be able to use it to solve this problem, but they're not actually defining the problem adequately. Now, the simple example is, it's the difference between correlation and causality.
Okay.
We know why something happens, not just that it happens. Okay. And so here's the simple example. Your son, you give him an ice cream cone with white ice cream. You ask him what flavor it is. It's going to tell you vanilla. Okay. It's actually coconut. Okay. But the correlation of white and vanilla is different because you never measured the flavor. You only measured the color. Okay.
Correct.
And so you have missing data that you'll never be able to get from that until you find out it doesn't work, and then start to figure it out. So it's a simple example, but it shows you that difference.
That makes a gap, right?
Yeah.
And what happened when that gap is not fixed?
Well, that's what I said. If the gap requires more data, we try to evaluate if we can collect it. And we are collecting data in Australia, as an example, and Mexico, and so on. If we can't get the data, then what we try to do is build a simulation to see what the impact of that missing data would be on solving the problem, and how critical it is, or how much of the problem we can solve and how much of the problem can't we solve. So we deal with that because that's the real world. We don't assume that all the data we want is going to be there. Whereas if you do it the other way, with big data, you're asking for more and more data, and you're assuming the answer's in the data, but you don't know what the question was.
Yeah. And more personally to you and your business as an entrepreneur, let's play that to you. How do you personally approach turning insight something practical?
Well, what we do, because it really involves an educational component to explain to people these things. So I'm involved. I give more than 10 presentations a year at conferences.
Mm-hmm.
We do podcasts and we publish papers. We don't do conventional advertising because conventional advertising would not be able to convey what we're trying to convey. So it doesn't make sense for us.
And in your own work, what still feels that it's hard to scale or apply?
Well, in our model, we're using something called a knowledge graph, which is part of AI and not the machine learning part.
Mm-hmm.
And we're using a novel way of building it so that we can identify gaps and conflicts. But it also is an ongoing learning environment, meaning that every new problem we tackle, we may learn something new and it continues to evolve. That allows us to very rapidly start in a new project without a lot of downtime because we know what questions to ask for the next problem. And so that becomes sort of whether you call it the secret sauce or our intellectual property or how we create, I call it it's a hub and spoke model. The hub of the wheel is our knowledge graph and our insights. The spokes are the different diseases we work in. And in principle, they're all using the same hub, but they're applying it to different problems. And there's this cross-fertilization among the problems. And then we can always add new spokes.
Correct.
And that's how we scale it.
Yeah. And as your
No, because of the educational component that we have to deal with. So what we've actually done, because it is requiring that deeper transmission of the understanding of what we're trying to do, we've actually launched in parallel a nonprofit that is tackling a couple of very, very large problems. That allows us to continue to develop our skills and our tools in a problem environment that I know isn't being tackled, but is very important in healthcare because we're looking at women's health issues.
yeah.
And we know that these are not being looked at adequately. And therefore, we have a great opportunity to contribute the results of what we're doing, but also to push very deeply with the questions we're trying to address to make sure we get to the right questions.
Wow. This is why women.
Why women? Because they're totally I call them the underserved majority. Okay. Of which there are underserved minorities in that, of course. But you're talking about 51% of the world's population. And, when in pharma, you talk about what's the patient population, you never get to 51% of the world.
Yes, correct. To finish, Michael, what mindset, sorry, to finish, what mindset do you think separates people who move forward from those who stay stuck?
I think it gets back to having an open mind. It's fine to come in with a preset expectation as long as you don't limit yourself to only following that expectation, but are willing to listen to other perspectives, other discussions, other approaches to find out if that perception is and perspective is adequate for the problem that has to be addressed. And I will talk with potential clients if they don't have that open perspective. I'm perfectly willing to listen to what they think their problem is and discuss it with them and work to refine it. But if they have a closed mind and they just want us to come in and do services, do statistics or something like that, I won't do it. I won't do it.
Yeah, that's good. Well, Michael, thank you very much for your time.
Thank
There
you.
is a very interesting conversation. Pretty sure that our audience will like it.
Oh, I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for watching the episode. See you next time. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.